Good morning, Adelaide. It's a wonderful sunny day here, and you're having a cuppa with the Conversationalist. Mine is a latte, as always. And this morning, my guest is a very interesting lady, and I'm going to let her tell her story. So my introduction will be very, very brief. This morning, I'm speaking to Jodie Atkinson, and Jodie is a certified grief recovery specialist. And Jodie helps people who are grieving. Through the grief recovery method, the griever is able to work through their grief, to overcome the pain of their loss and to move forward, enabling them to have a healthy relationship with their loss and a more positive connection to the person who passed away. Good morning, Jodie. How are you?
Good morning, Con. It's nice to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Lovely to have you here. Look, you sent me your intro last night, and as we spoke earlier before we started recording, I think it's really important that you tell your story on how you actually got to where you are and what the grief recovery method is actually all about.
Yeah, so I was quite happy with life. Things were going pretty well, and didn't really have any too much to worry about. And all of a sudden, my husband was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and it was quite a very quick, brutal, short period of time. And 37 days later, he passed away. So yeah, my whole world changed and tipped upside down, and I was I was just devastated. So yeah, grief became a very close companion to me very, very quickly. And I basically was working with a social worker from palliative care unit that was helping with Craig's illness. But after I finished up with that, with bereavement counselling, I was searching for something a little bit more for support for myself. And I was really struggling to find something. And I reached out to a couple of places and found they had very limited availability, like their time of their meetings or their groups were really kind of middle of the day. And on my busiest day, I had returned to work at that point. And I thought, this is harder than it should be to try and find that support. And I started talking to a couple of friends and people who had also been through loss, and talked to them about their journey. And a couple of them had reached out to grief support groups and found that in some cases they felt like it was more pulling them into their grief rather than out of it. And that doesn't really sit well for me. I was looking to be pulled out of the grief, not be sort of compounding it, so to speak. So I stumbled across the grief recovery method, and I was instantly intrigued and fascinated by what this thing was, because I'd never ever heard of it before. I rang up about it, and I basically, from that conversation, booked into the training, booked flights and accommodation to Perth.
Wow.
And that was 6 months prior to the training, because it was either go to Singapore in November or go to Perth in March. And November for me, this was all happening in September. Singapore was just too big a step for me at that time. I just thought, I just can't see myself doing that bigger leap. So off I went to Perth, and it's honestly the best thing I ever did in terms of coming to terms with grief and finishing that unresolved business that you have. I thought I had taken steps to do that. I thought Craig and I had said everything and done everything that we needed to do, but obviously there was some stuff there. And yeah, I can honestly say that as a result of doing that, I have a much more positive connection to him, but also I don't have the heaviness and the ache and the deep, painful sort of emotions and sinking feeling in my chest assessed as a result
Wow.
of undergoing this program. So because I struggled to find something here in Adelaide, I thought, you know what, I'm gonna bring this back because other people need to have access to this.
Indeed. And everyone, we always talk, everyone's got a story, and my heart goes out for you for 37 days of what would have been absolute sheer horror.
Yeah.
I lost my ex, and I had a child that was born at 6 a.m. and was performed last rites at 10 o'clock at night. And it's only just recently that I've come to terms with how it happened and how I reacted to it. And I know at that time, like you, there was what was available. It was like one size fits all. Like, here it is. This is what we do. We have our meetings. And we were thrust into these meetings where they weren't, there was absolutely no connection. We just didn't, it wasn't helpful. In fact, it was almost counterproductive. It was actually worse. So, Jodie, for our listeners and viewers, indeed, there is people dealing with grief on a hourly, daily basis. There's no question of that. Some people deal better. Some people don't deal. Some people bury. Yours truly. The grief recovery method that you've spoken about is obviously that is a individual type of program. Can you tell us a little bit more about perhaps different cases and how it helps for the viewers to understand the tailoredness to it to their each individual circumstances?
Sure. Firstly, like, obviously, sorry to hear your story as well. And like, it is, while, I've spoken about my situation, the grief recovery method is a program that is for, if you have children that are grieving. So I can actually help adults who, I don't work directly with kids, but I do work with adults who might be either parents or caregivers, maybe teachers at school, who are working with kids that are grieving and not sure how to have those conversations with them. So we do have a program where we can help children cope with grief and give them the tools to communicate that, but also upskill the adults in their life to be able to take the kids through that process as well. Or pet loss, which is a really big thing. We have a lot of fur babies out there, and they leave paw prints on our hearts, and that can be a really devastating time. So the program can be used for in pet loss. It's also about relationships. So not all loss has to be about death. Relationship breakdown, and while divorce and things like that, and divorce does deal with the financials and the practicalities, it doesn't deal with the emotional aspects of that relationship breakdown. So there is loss there as well. And look, have a look at the world today. There's a hell of a lot of loss out there, and a lot of grief. There's a lot of fear. And the world is grieving at the moment, and that is going to look very different for a lot of different people, very unique experiences. So when someone is working through the grief recovery method, it's an experiential program, and it is very much about how that individual chooses to focus on their particular loss. So you might have somebody that has, very mixed emotions about the loss they've had. It's someone that they love, but there's anger about something, and there's unresolved business, there's unfinished communication. There's all these unmet hopes, dreams, and expectations of a relationship, and of things that have just suddenly disappeared. So of course, when you're dealing with that, there's going to be grief, because that's what grief is, really.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's, you know, we're talking about broken hearts, not broken brains. So trying not to intellectualize what's going on for that person, and not trying to tell them not to feel a certain way, because they feel it. That's how they feel. It's not up to the other people around them to try and make sense of that.
Yeah, your comment about don't intellectualize it is quite valid. But, and again, just going back to our experience, we had people making comments like, "Oh, you know, it's okay because she was only a day old. You didn't get to take her home," and comments like that. And I mean, we were 28 years old. We were kids, and it's the comments, and I'm sure you would have got some absolute beauties as well, which are just, people just don't think sometimes, and they really shouldn't be passing these comments. Look, I just want to go back, and I'm intrigued and curious, and I certainly don't want to make this about me, but one of my issues was, or one of the challenges that I faced, which I really struggled with, was we were given the opportunity to hold her before it was all done and dusted, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't do it. I wasn't emotionally capable of doing it at the time. And after the event, as time passed, my anger toward myself and my frustration with being a bad father because I couldn't hold my child when she needed me most haunted me for years and years and years. And it's only been the last couple of years where I've actually come to terms with it and accepted that it is what it was, and that doesn't make me a bad person as such. But you've spoken about pet grief, loss, relationships. What, and sadly, the cemetery is just, with the kids section, is just, it's an exponential growth. It's tragic, the pain and suffering. Your program, how could that have helped somebody like me, or indeed somebody going through the same thing?
Absolutely. So basically, it's about helping people, as I was saying, about unfinished business or unresolved business, unresolved or undelivered communication. So those hopes, dreams and expectations of, the relationship, or for a child in your situation, there's a lot of grief around that. It's giving you the opportunity to finish that. So while, for example, like while Craig has gone, there was some things that I needed to get off my chest, so to speak. And through the grief recovery method, I discovered things, because I drilled down into that. I got to work through and really focus on that. And look, with grief, it's going to touch our lives, multiple times. We're all, we're parents, we have grandparents, we have pets, we have kids, we have relationships that sometimes break down. So we get to, once you've done the program and you've done it for one loss, you can work through other losses. So it gives you a way of being able to, just because I've worked on Craig doesn't mean that, there's other relationships that I can do. Like I've had other, I've lost grandparents, and I've divorced. And, you think that you've come to terms with those things, but when you start to unpack them a little bit and start to look at them through the recovery method, you go, wow, actually there's some stuff there that's not quite resolved, and I've just kind of got used to living with that. So there are ways of once you've done the program and you've worked on, I worked on my most significant and most devastating loss, because I figured that's what I'm here for, and this is the thing that's completely turned my world upside down. So the other losses that are unique in what they are. I'm not trying to take away from them, but that was the one that was really, I was really struggling with. And I think, like, can I come back to what you were saying before about the things that people say to you when you are going through a really hard time? And that's something that a lot of people don't have successful grief recovery experiences. They just do not know what to say. And, you know, it's sort of our parents and our primary caregivers role model grief, I guess, grief, how to deal with that or how to resolve it. And we sort of see people, you know, slinking off to their room when they're feeling sad, or just being quite stoic and pushing through. And we've created, you know, a bit of a problem for ourselves in that, because like we actually address the 6 myths of grief in the grief recovery program, and they're pretty much the ones that you touched on, which was don't feel bad or sad. You know, of course, someone is going to be feeling whatever they're feeling when they are experiencing loss. Be strong is another one. You know, people would say to me, like, I was strong and you're so strong. And I thought, but, you know, at the time of hearing that, I didn't feel strong at all. And I actually started to really, you know, when I heard the words be strong, it was just like, oh, like, I don't want to hear that, because, you know, that's not helpful. Replacing the loss, you know, and saying things like, you know, or at least, you know, you didn't get to take her home. That's just an incredibly insensitive comment. And people don't sort of know that is insensitive and unhelpful until you're on the receiving end of such a comment, because it is well intentioned. And I, you know, I understand that, but yeah, it's a very different ball game when you're trying to console someone. Grieving alone, you know, isolation is the worst thing for a griever, and hello, we're all being isolated as we speak.
Absolutely.
So it's really important to be reaching out to people who might be doing it really tough at the moment, and especially people who are grieving the loss of employment, relationship breakdown. And, you know, there are people that are losing loved ones, and, you know, they're now not even being able to say goodbye how they might want to, with the changes to the funeral ceremonies and things like that. So there'll be a lot of feelings, emotions, unresolved communication, and a lot of you know, confusion around how that looks for a lot of people right now. Time is a healer. That's another one. You know, I think you know, it's very evident to me in different, like the research that I had done around grief. There are people who are still feeling very, very absorbed by their grief 10, 15, 20 years after the fact. And for someone like me who was newly bereaved, like, I found that a little bit confronting, because I thought, well, I'm only a few short weeks, months into this. You're telling me that in 10 years time I'm still going to be feeling this way? Like, I am ripped apart from the inside. I feel like razor blades have cut me up inside. And you're telling, I'm reading something that you've shared, and I'm feeling like I'm still going to feel like this in 10 years time. So I think time without action, you know, but action is what is needed, and it's working through a process to be able to overcome that. And the other one is a big one, is keeping busy, you know, distraction. You know, bury yourself in work, you know, binge watching Netflix, you know, drinking, going out, dancing and partying. Very much ways of coping with suppressing those emotions and distracting ourselves from those painful associations that we have. And we call them STERBs, short-term emotional relieving behaviours. So they might be good short-term and they give us some relief, but long-term they don't actually offer any real resolution towards achieving recovery.
They're really band-aid jobs, is what you're saying. And I can certainly relate to a lot of what you've said. One of the comments after a year to my wife at the time was, "Oh, it's been a year. Haven't you gotten over it yet?
Yeah.
And it's
Oh,
like, are you kidding me?
yeah.
Are you kidding me? Look,
I hear you. I
it,
totally hear you.
yeah, look, it's you talked about that invariably people are touched by grief at some point in their life, and it's a case of when, not if.
Yeah.
And, whether it's as we get older, friends, relatives, loved ones, it just gets more prevalent. And interestingly, I was at a function a year or so ago now, and a lad who's friends with my son said, geez, well, we were going to 21sts, now we're going to 30ths. I said, mate, you get to my stage and it's funerals,
Oh,
which are more than 30ths and 60ths. Jodie, I just like to touch on one other point that you mentioned as well, is the
yep.
current isolation rules specifically surrounding funerals. A good friend of mine, her mum passed away recently, and they were only allowed to have 9 people there, plus the celebrant makes 10,
Mm-hmm.
and invariably one of the great grandchildren missed out. Now, I would imagine that that would add to the grief and the frustration and the anxiety. So tell us a little bit more about how people can deal with that. And the other thing as well is, with the distancing measures, am I to assume that the husband can't console the wife, and or vice versa? Is that what this is that what they're saying?
Yeah, like I actually went to a funeral just before all of these changes came in, and a number of people had chosen to not go to that funeral for the reasons they, you know,
Mm,
self-isolation, or
mm,
just in that high risk group of, you know, with COVID-19. So,
sure.
um, and we were encouraged not to hug each other then, and it felt very weird and quite unnatural to not want to go up and hug people
Yeah.
and give your condolences. And
Mm,
so yeah, I had first-hand experience of that. It was and it certainly wasn't even it was one of my clients, but it was certainly like the family were consoling each other, but everyone was kind of quite mindful of making sure that there wasn't too much of that going on.
mm,
But yes, I can imagine that if you're that person that gets to sit sit at home while everyone else is at a funeral, that in itself is going to bring up a huge
sure.
range of feelings. I think for some people, like, a funeral is a way of saying goodbye, and there is a sense of
Mm,
closure, I think,
mm,
depending on how close you are to that person. For me, that it didn't really offer that closure for me. It
mm,
was something that has to be done, and we wanted to make sure we did the best we could for Craig and honour him. But I certainly didn't feel like that was it for me.
mm,
For everybody goes back to their life afterwards, and it's not until
mm,
2 or 3 or 4 months down the track when there's something that they would do to, if something breaks in the house, they fix it.
yeah.
Something happens, that person just bringing you a morning cup of coffee, that kind of stuff. It's those moments when you really start to notice that
Mm,
absence, and people, I think, forget about those moments, and they're just, oh, I better just check in on them, make sure they're okay, and
mm,
but it's those when you're alone moments, and you just notice that there's that absence, and it's not just
mm,
about what they did for you, but it's everything that
yeah.
that person was. It's the relationship, it's the intimacy, it's the connection, it's the shoulder to cry on when things are hard, it's the person you want to guess what happened today
Mm,
when something good
mm,
happens, and it's just sitting quietly and having that comfortable silence at the end of the day, and no one needs to speak, but you're perfectly okay in that space. So
Yeah.
they're the things that people don't see.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing as well, I've noticed, not certainly in my situation, but indeed others, where there's a death or the passing of a loved one, and there's obviously a lot of people who, check in, are you okay, spend time with you, call past the house, certainly not now, but before COVID-19.
Yeah.
And as time goes on, that level and amount of contact starts to fall away. And then the day comes where it's like nobody calls, nobody's there, and the almost the realization that you're alone hits you like a sledgehammer. And
Yeah.
it's awful. I just feel so bad for people who endure that and aren't aware that of the grief recovery method, and just accept and assume that the counsellor from the hospital for 2 weeks is going to fix everything, and time heals all wounds, and keep yourself busy and it'll be okay. And it's not.
Yeah.
And your work is, like, as I said, when I read your introduction that you sent me last night, I thought, me telling your story just doesn't give it the we'll say validity or the importance that it did, coming from you. And 37 days just blows me away. Look, we could talk about this forever and ever and a day. It's indeed a fascinating topic, and certainly the world is changing as we know it. People will deal with grief on a daily basis for whatever. And what I've learnt from you, Jodie, I guess the most important thing is that people say grief and we automatically equate that to death or the passing of a loved one or a friend or a family. And you mentioned the fur babies. I know friends of mine who, like, their pets are like more important than the kids. And the pain that they endure when they lose a pet, but also the different kinds of grief, relationships, pets, the loss of a job.
Yep.
Yesterday I was going to my office. I was a valued employee. I'm an important part of the community, and all of a sudden today I'm sitting home and I have to line up for benefits.
Yeah.
And I don't think people equate that to grief.
Yeah.
And I
It's
really,
loss.
it's loss. And I really thank you for actually making that distinction or bringing that up, because a lot of people would have just gone, grief recovery. Well, okay, I haven't lost anybody. I don't need to watch. I don't need to listen. But nothing could be further from the truth.
Absolutely.
Jodie, there are so many people that need to hear your story and listen to what you do. And I'm going to put your details up now. Bear with me.
It's all right. I just wanted to say, it's an uncomfortable topic. It's one of those things that you don't often have people freely engaging in. And, like I said to you before, we're all going to be touched by it. And it is a perfectly natural part of life. And it's something that we could be doing a lot better.
Absolutely.
Coping with our own grief, but also how we support people who are grieving. Yeah.
That's that's another good point. As individuals, we need to learn to be better at helping people deal with their grief, rather than making insensitive, irrelevant comments. Jodie, I've got your details up for the viewers to see. So Jodie Atkinson, there's Jodie's email, and that is Jodie Atkinson with a numerical zero at gmail.com. JodieAtkinson.com. Website is under construction. And Jodie, I always say to people when I speak to them, whether it's on this program or in meetings or whatever, the work that people do is so important and so highly necessary in the community. I can't encourage you enough to get your website done, even if it has some contact details on it, because people need you now. Your phone number is there, and you can follow Jodie on Facebook, Jodie Atkinson, Grief Recovery Specialist. So for anybody out there watching who has been touched or is dealing with grief, or is in a situation where they will be dealing with grief, a loved one is going through a terminal illness or the like, I strongly encourage you to get in touch with Jodie and deal with it, and don't suppress it, because it doesn't just go away. Jodie, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you this morning. I thank you for taking your valuable time. The conversations of the last week have been very, very different, and I really didn't know what to expect this morning, but I've gotten a little bit emotional because you kind of touch some points there, and it really brings home. So again, I thank you very, very much. To all the viewers, no, you're absolutely welcome. To all the viewers, my name's Con. I'm the Conversationalist. It's been a pleasure this morning. Stay safe, stay positive, and like we said, please stay connected.
Yeah,
Until
absolutely.
Tomorrow, bye for now. Thanks, Jodie.
Bye. Thanks. Bye.